theme of commitment has been showing itself to me lately, hearing a lot of stories in relationships, thinking a lot about our relationship to media and how we tend to, as millennials and younger, get the judgment that we can't pay attention to anything. And I think it all comes down to commitment. I think we have some commitment challenges as millennials and younger. And really, it can apply to anyone. We all can have some sort of commitment issues when it comes to relationships and projects and our health and things like that. I've definitely had a lack of commitment in multiple areas. And there's the millennial narrative in particular around how we've been told that we can do and be anything. And as a result, we commit to nothing. I think what happens for a lot of us is this feeling or this something I've been told when I was younger, when I worked at Taco Bell when I was like 17. One of my managers said when he was talking about delegating, he's like, if you tell someone to do something, no one will do anything. And it's kind of that idea. It's such a vague direction that it leads to non-commitment. It's like you're waiting and looking for the perfect situation or the ideal partner or the ideal thing to capture your commitment. And we can define that by any number of things. We can define that as like what makes us feel good, what makes us comfortable, what makes us feel safe, and what maybe guarantees money or what guarantees status or success, and a feeling of safety, which I think is another millennial trait, is a desire for safety. It's interesting that I've seen these demographics around men my age, around 38 to 42 years old, entering midlife, that we are taking risks to try to game the system. The highest demographic with sports bettors is around my age. And the feeling is that they're not taking a risk. The feeling is that we're trying to game the system to secure some sort of safety, to secure some sort of security. And the feeling there is that there's a perpetual behindness for a lot of our generation, and for men in particular. I've done stuff about it. And that feeling of this paradox almost of like desiring security and then almost needing to do anything to make it happen. And in that sense, there's no desire for a specific commitment because it's really just looking for what works, which is different from Gen Xers who just want to show competence. They just want to show their intelligence. They want to show that they can adapt and be anything that they want to be. Whereas with millennials, it feels like we're waiting for the perfect thing that provides a sense of meaning and purpose and aligns with our identity and our sense of self and all of that stuff. And I think it leads to this challenge of non-commitment for a lot of us. So again, we get this sort of feeling, or we get this judgment, I should say, that, we can't pay attention to anything. And increasingly younger people are losing their attention spans, when I think it is a lack of commitment. There are just so many options. I've had feelings recently, within the last few months, I've been to something like Barnes & Noble, where there's just this increase in quality of available knowledge and entertainment, books and movies and things to do and things to create and things to be a part of, and even business opportunities, like all sorts of things you can start for yourself. You can try to be some sort of a coach or start a YouTube channel, and basically do something that is self-propelled. But again, there's this feeling of like arrested by the paradox of choice. And there's just so many options that it feels like it's a challenge to commit to anything. And so with that in mind, I'm trying to create this awareness within myself around this idea of committing myself to something. It's led me down this rabbit hole of death anxiety, there's this book called Staring at the Sun. It's a existential therapist talking about his work and some examples of people he's worked with, and speaking about death anxiety, and that there's a lot of great anxiety that comes from this paradox of choice, that I'm afraid to commit to something because, well, there's FOMO, there's the fear of missing out, but inherently, if you choose something, you're not choosing nearly everything else. People struggle with this with partners. You pick a person, and you're not picking other people, is sometimes the unconscious other side of that can come with a ton of anxiety and this feeling of like, oh no, did I make the right choice? And commitment does come with this notion of well, it's committing, it's taking the path, it's taking the step in a particular direction. And that can be really difficult to dive into. I mean, that's massively, for me, it's massively anxiety inducing. Just today, I've been updating this Substack and podcast so that I'm separating all of these feeds. So I've got the Spiral, which is about spiral development of humans. I've got the Optimist, which is a new thing I'm starting that's about highlighting positive news stories and tech developments and ideas emerging around like social development or infrastructure development, things like that are all positive stories that are these little seeds of emergence of different parts around the world that I think are really interesting to dive into. And then I've got the Mood, which it's like the journal entries and stuff that I was trying here on Substack. And then Personality Strategy, which is diving into more personality related stuff. And so I made separate Substacks for all of those. If you go into dopamine.substack.com, the links are still at the top, but they will take you to separate Substacks. And effectively, even though I'm splitting my focus, I am committing to the fractals of these ideas, that these are all things that have grown out of my work here on dopamine, of these 7 years of trying to figure out this relationship between my mental health and my personality, that these topics have come out of it. It's the mood, it's the mental health side, it's personality, it's the personality development side, it's the spiral development side, and more so recently, looking into these more optimistic viewpoints, which are a challenge for a lot of us to find the positive in the direction we're going as a collective. And I think committing to something is ultimately about finding the positive in that and finding how that can have an emergent positive outcome. I mean, committing to anything in general can be a development of purpose, but then it also is this feeling of waking up every day and having something that you're putting your effort and energy into. There's the concept of limerence comes up also with relationships, where limerence is this notion that there's no boundaries between people in relationships. When people are struggling with emotional boundaries is usually when they're vulnerable to limerence. It's this notion that, you have this like puppy love or imagined or twin flame relationship with somebody. It's in your mind, you have a relationship with them, but they don't have a relationship to you. It's like you create a fantasy of them. And in that way, you objectify them because they have no consent in the emotionality of the relationship. And it's manufacturing this commitment to this person in a way, which can sometimes be a way of staving off loneliness by being constantly merged with a person. I've talked about it with intimacy in the last podcast and emotional boundaries in other previous episodes. And ultimately, that when that comes up, when you're in a relationship, when you're with a partner or you're married to somebody and your eyes are still open to other people, or it's something that comes up where maybe you do experience a limerence of another person, and they become this fantasy of a different path or a different way, it could very well be like, I'm not going to pretend like that couldn't be a possibility, that that new person could be a new direction for you in your life. It depends on your circumstance. So I'm not being judgmental in that sense. But what I'm saying is that sometimes limerence comes as a result of a lack of commitment to a partner or to your life. Sometimes dysthymia and depression can come as a lack of commitment to your life and to your direction, to your health and to your happiness, right? And now I see commitment, like commitment is an interesting word because I don't think it's necessarily this hyper discipline that a lot of Gen Xers and older kind of talk about. There's this almost internal discipline's important. You have to discipline yourself to be able to commit to something. But I like the word commitment because it's an agreement. Discipline sometimes feels like you're forcing yourself to do it. And there's like a discomfort there, like you're forcing yourself against your own will almost, or trying to trick yourself, like taking pills or trying to find some way to like propel yourself in an unnatural way. Commitment is very natural and it's what we all long for. It's something we do search for, but it is I would say it's a choice. Yeah, I think I would say it's a choice to commit to something. And there's this really great YouTube video that I saw many years ago called The Mathematics of Love. And it really goes into the mathematics of our context and situation, where if you're dating and you're looking for someone who's in your geographic area and who fits these particular criteria, maybe it's one of the more shallow ones like height or weight or something like that, certain looks, maybe you want them to be within a certain ethnic demographic, which happens, and any number of criteria. And so the more criteria placed on that, and then location and amount of people and people who aren't relatives and stuff like that, the numbers dwindle pretty fast. And that's not to say that you should drop your standards to an unreasonable amount to settle, but there is a degree of like good enough. Especially, I think there's a math equation in that YouTube video that also talks about how there is after you date, if you date people like one or two people before 21 years old, that theoretically the first person you date after that is likely to be the person that would be good enough. I forget if that's the actual math, but if you watch that video, you'll see what I mean. It's the idea of like, testing out a few people, and then you have a good enough sign of like what it is that you want in a partner, and then you make the choice. And it is like, it's hard. Life is about making choices. There's a lot of life that's about making choices and reconciling and dealing with not making other choices. I mean, frankly, if you live in this place of like keeping yourself so open all the time that you make a bunch of shallow choices, or you end up waiting for the perfect choice and therefore you make no choice at all, then it's like committing to non-commitment. It's like commitment is there either way. You're just committing to non-commitment, right? So it's a notion I feel like I'm needing more baking around in my mind. I think commitment is a powerful concept to think about, but commitment is different from discipline. I think there is this, if I was looking for the word between discipline and surrender, and I think it might be commitment. Discipline, again, is like you have to have some degree of discipline to not sleep with other people or to not just like eat all the chips or eat all the people. The other side of that is surrender, which is a degree of trust and faith. Trust that the other person won't not commit to you, or that that going this path will be the path because you can only see so far. There are some people who can claim to have met someone right away, and they know if that's the person for them or not. And for much of us, we just don't actually know until we start walking. We start traveling down the path. And I think there's a degree of committing to something that makes us feel like we can't turn around. I mean, as someone who's been in a divorce, like, you can turn around. It's hard, but you can turn around, or you can make a different choice, or you can make a shift in some way, right? There is this like fear that a commitment is absolutely forever, lifelong. And some are. There's no going back from certain things, but there is a certain courage and bravery from going forward either way. I mean, much of our life is about fear. Death anxiety is about fear. Fear is how we operate, blame, shame, and guilt all the time. I've done episodes on that recently. And there's some point where it's like going forward in spite of fear is what living is. You know, otherwise we're agoraphobic in our room or in our house all the time, not wanting to talk to anyone or not wanting to do anything. We have to make a choice and then commit ourselves to that choice and not just blame the world or blame our partner or blame some abstract government official. You know, it's up to us to find the path through and make the discernment if the path through is the path through, right? One of the things that I have a hard time with also is like, it's tough when I take a lot of photos, for example. I'll take hundreds of photos at an event, and the easy ones, like the easy things to get rid of, are always so satisfying. It's easy to say like, that one's blurry, that one's weird, that one's misshapen, that just doesn't look good, that's a weird composition, the color got weird on that one. Those are the easy things to make decisions around, and that's very comfortable. I like doing that. But it's usually the second or third round where now I have to make decisions between two photos that look very similar, or I've got like 50 photos that look really good and my client just needs 10. And that means I've got to start getting rid of things that I like. And that's really hard, to start chipping away at things that I like. Especially now, there's something about having all of these definitive versions of movies and TV shows and books coming out of things that I grew up with that now I can suddenly like sink my teeth into. But what I don't have now that I had as a kid is time. And like, I would love to go and read all of like the Dragon Ball manga or rewatch Dragon Ball Z again. Or, you know, I've been thinking about watching the old Ninja Turtles movie, and I feel so arrested by making those decisions because I'm like, well, I'm giving up on watching something new. And, you know, I don't want to watch this over and over again, right? It's really tough. It's tough to make the choice between things that you know you will enjoy versus things that you don't know you will enjoy, or things that seem close enough that you just have to make a choice to go one way or the other. Sometimes it's an arbitrary choice too. It's just rock, paper, scissors, or pick a number between 1 and 100, right? And you just have to let the other things go. And that's kind of the surrender part I'm talking about. It's the letting go. The surrender is you've got to let go of other things. You know, the discipline is picking something and sticking to it. The surrender is by proxy, you have to let go of things and be able to move on and move forward. And that is so tough. But in the middle, I think, is commitment. I'm going to keep thinking about that, and maybe I'm wrong, but and I would love for you to tell me if I'm wrong. But I think commitment is quite in the center of that diagram, and I think I'm going to make a graphic around that because that's really interesting now that I think about it. I mostly wanted to make this episode because I've been thinking about commitment for a little while, but I have been making these changes on Substack. And so if you've been following me on Substack, dopamine.substack.com, DOPEAMINE.substack.com, I have now taken these different publications and they're now separate. separate Substacks, and they will be separate podcasts as well. So if you've been following me and you enjoy those, go ahead and subscribe to those other publications. Each of those are community funded. So if you want to leave a couple bucks, I think it's $8 a month for each of them. They're all free, accessible, but if you want to support the one that you like, you can go ahead and become a supporter that way financially. So again, they are Dopamine, which is this one, which is going to stay about these kind of big picture topics. And I would say it's spirituality, but it's spirituality in the discovery of the self. It's self-coaching is kind of the focus here. Then I've got the Mood, which is the mental health side of things, the Spiral, human development side of things. Then it's personality strategy, using more of the technical details of personality types, Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, stuff like that. And then this new one is called The Optimist, which is about looking for the emerging, interesting advancements that are happening in technology and food and production, stuff that I keep seeing all these interesting news stories about that seem to be ignored in favor of these more low-hanging fruit arguments against, like, I don't know, anti-capitalism and anti-government and all of these other things that are sort of easy low-hanging fruits. It's the easy things, it's the easy photos to get rid of. But like, I think being able to see the optimism, not reframing in toxic positivity, but the optimism of what is developing in our world. I can go to 7-Eleven now and I can get a smoothie that's all organic fruit for $3 in a glass container, and it's delicious. What a world when those things are accessible, despite all of the other things in the world, right? It's the yes and of it all. It's like, yes, there are troubling, difficult things in the world, and there are people doing work to make healthier food more accessible, cost affordable. There are new technologies, there's AI, there's all sorts of health improvements, like so many new discoveries and ideas that I really hope to bring some of those things to light through these news feeds. So that's what's happening here, and I am committing myself to that work, primarily the Optimist. If I can commit myself to one of these things, it's the Optimist and here on Dopamine, because it's been great. And you've been a great listener, and I really appreciate you. So leave a comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to this, and join me over at Substack, dopamine.substack.com, DOPEAMINE. And I'll catch you next time. I have been Christian Rivera, aka C Note, and I'll talk to you later. Later.